one of the biggest misconceptions with real estate investing. We get asked this all the time. When I have a tenant who does not pay me, how do I go about getting the tenant out of the property? I hear it takes months. And usually this is followed up with different horror stories people have heard of having it take months and months to get tenants who don't pay their rent out of a property. So here's how it works in Ontario. When you have a tenant who does not pay you rent, you can file an N4 the day after they do not pay you rent. They have 14 days to pay you. If they don't pay you within those 14 days, you can spend, I think it's $170 right now with the Landlord-Tenant Board in Ontario to get a hearing. So it's an L1 form that you file, and then you'll get a hearing, and you go to the hearing, and if everything's in order, you're going to get a judgment from the adjudicator at the tenant board to get the tenant to move out of your property. It's not really complicated. Generally, the horror stories and what people hear, the horror stories come from situations like this, where someone knows someone who owns a property. The tenant didn't pay them rent one month. Then the tenant gave them a story on why they're not paying them rent that month, and they believed the story and went along with the story, and they let a whole month pass, and then the tenant doesn't pay for the next month and comes up with a new story as to why they're going to take another 2 weeks to pay the rent. And this drags on and on for months and months, and then finally the landlord decides to go to the tenant board, and perhaps they didn't do things properly when they went to the tenant board. They didn't have their lease in order, and they go to the tenant board not prepared, and maybe there's a delay at the tenant board, and it's typically something that they've done. So usually, if you have your ducks in a row and you follow things in order, the Landlord-Tenant Board in Ontario is actually really useful. It's nothing to be scared of. It works for both tenants and landlords, and there's never really a problem getting a tenant out of a property. And of course, there's exceptions to this, and there's all sorts of different exceptions that can happen, but in general, it's a really nice, easy process. If you're interested in this, just Google up the Landlord-Tenant Board in Ontario. You'll get their website. They have beautiful forms with descriptions on how this works. And one last thing, if you're really worried about people leaving on you and maybe having a vacant property and not finding a new tenant for your property, there's a new service that's just come out in Canada. We were sharing it with our members. We brought someone to speak at the member event. It's called Rent Shield. If you just Google Rent Shield Canada, I think it's rentshield.ca that is the website, and they will insure your property for up to 11 months of vacancy. So if your property goes vacant, you will get rent paid by Rent Shield during that 11 months. That's it. Hopefully you find that useful. Until next time, your life, your terms.